Hello again, and welcome back to Psychology. This is Miss Lee, and I'm so glad you're here. In today's video, we're going to continue with Unit 1, which is Scientific Inquiry, Section 3, Contemporary Perspectives. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and grab your notes and get ready. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about the main contemporary perspectives in psychology. So exactly what do I mean by perspectives? This is how a person looks at something. It's kind of like looking through a particular type of lens. You already have some ideas about what is going on. There are 8 main contemporary perspectives in psychology. The first one is biological. So you're looking at things like the nervous system, neurotransmitters, glands, hormones, basically anything related to our genetic factors. So we're looking at how does biology influence our behavior? How does brain imaging show mental processes? And do our genes influence our personality? The second perspective is the evolutionary perspective. And this is going back to ideas from Charles Darwin. We talked a little bit about Darwin and his beliefs in our last video, but basically this is focusing on the evolution of behavior and mental processes. If it works, it's more likely to continue on. If it's a trait that has helped a species survive, whether it's a physical trait or a mental trait, then that animal or human is more likely to survive and pass on its genes. The third perspective is the cognitive perspective. Cognitive psychologists study mental processes to understand human nature, and they believe that people's behaviors are influenced by their values, their perceptions, their choices, their understandings of things. The fourth perspective is the humanistic perspective. This stresses the human capacity for self-fulfillment, reaching your highest potential. It stresses the importance of our consciousness, our ability to understand our own behavior, self-awareness, and the capacity to make choices. Humanists believe that we're free to choose our behavior, and they believe that we're basically good and that we desire to be helpful to others. It's much more of a positive perspective than we have seen with some of the other perspectives, which are more neutral or even in some cases much more negative towards human behavior. So self-actualization, I mentioned that in the last slide. This is basically being self-motivated to strive to get to your highest abilities, to reach your own potential. And this kind of evolved into a way of doing therapy that became popular in the 60s and 70s, and it is still the most commonly widely used humanistic technique, the client-centered therapy. So you've got Carl Rogers on the bottom and Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow, if you go back to the last slide, he was the one who came up with that hierarchy of needs, that if we don't have our physiological needs met first, we are not able to continue on through that path of safety needs, then social needs, then esteem needs, and that highest peak of self-actualization. And those are the humanists. Our fifth perspective is the psychoanalytic and psychodynamic perspectives. We talked about Freud in our last video. So if you will recall, the psychoanalytic psychodynamic perspective stresses the influence of unconscious desires and conflicts on our behavior. So Sigmund Freud was the person who came up with this idea, and then the next wave, the Neo-Freudians took Freud's beliefs about the unconscious driving our behaviors, but there was less of a focus on sexual impulses and aggression and more on the conscious choice and self-direction of humanity. The sixth perspective is a learning or behavioral perspective. People who are behavioralists emphasize the effects of experience on behavior. So you've got the classical and operant conditioning that we talked about in our last slide, but we also have the social learning theory, which suggests that people can actually change their environments or create new ones, mostly based on what they observe. So you can learn your behavior by watching from someone else. I was a younger sister and I learned some things that I should do and what I shouldn't do from my older sister. So what we see, we do. The sociocultural perspective looks at the influences of our ethnicity, of our gender, our culture, socioeconomic status, and how that translates into our behavior, how it influences our mental processes, even how it influences the rates of mental illness in those subgroups. Sociocultural psychologists look at ethnic groups and they look at gender and they also look at the effects of stereotyping, of prejudice, and of discrimination. And last but not least, the bio-psychosocial perspective. The key assumption here is that all of those things that we've talked about up to this point kind of come together into a big ball. And you've got biological, psychological, and social factors all converging and mixing up to make us who we are. That was really quick. So before we move on, let's recap. That was section 3. And you should now be able to describe the main contemporary perspectives in psychology. In our next video, we're going to be discussing research methodology. I can't wait to see you then. Bye for now.